So we left off talking about the terms of prejudice and discrimination, and I just wanted to draw your attention back to a study that was brought up in a few different pieces of the weekly content this week. Let me move my floating head box here so you can see this chart a little more clearly. So in both one of the Who Me Biased videos as well as in one of the written web links that I was asked you to view this week, they brought up this study that really shows how bias comes to manifest in forms of discrimination. So just to refresh your memory here, the study that I'm referring to was conducted by a team of social scientists who emailed out or sent an email out to over 6,500 college professors throughout the United States. And the purpose of their study was, in these emails, they were pretending to be a prospective graduate student. So they're pretending to be a college student who was supposed to have an interest in pursuing graduate school at the college that these professors worked at. Now, again, these weren't real students, but the professors didn't know that. And these emails had an identical script. They all said the exact same thing, and you can see verbatim, word for word, what that was in the assigned reading this week. They included that. The only thing that was different about these emails was the name of the prospective student sending the email. And the names were differed by gender, and they also had certain racial or ethnic connotations attached to them. So you can see, for example, a list of few of the names that this research team used. Again, these are fake people. These names don't actually represent real students. These researchers sent out 6,500 emails to different professors pretending to be people with different names that represented different genders and different races. So this is actually an example of an experimental design, and experiments are very commonly used in sociology, especially in the field of social psychology, where we're really trying to better understand people's thought processes. And the reason why experiments work so well is because they use what's referred to as a control. So the control in this particular experiment is the script that the researchers sent out. And it's called a control because it is controlled. It's kept the same for every single condition in this study, right? Every single one of these fictitious students sent out the exact same email that was simply asking to have a brief conversation with the professor about pursuing a PhD or a graduate degree in their program. So the only thing that was different for each of these individual cases, or the only variable in this case that they were really interested in looking at, was the fictitious student's gender and their race. And what they found in this study, which is reported in this table over here, is that white male students were more likely to get responses than all women and minority students combined. So you can look at these percentages here, and they break it down in this table based off of the discipline. We saw the biggest disparity in replies to these email messages from professors in business. 87% of the emails sent out from names that sounded like white men. One example was Brad Anderson. 87% of those got replies from professors in business. Comparatively, only 62% of the emails sent out by people who had women names or names that were associated with a race or ethnicity of color, only 62% of those emails got a reply. And then you can see that that was the case across virtually every single discipline. All of these professors, the only discipline where women students and students with names that sounded like they were a person of color got more responses were in the fine arts. Virtually every other discipline, if you had a white male sounding name, a college professor was more likely to reply to your email. So why might this be? Does this mean that the vast majority of college professors in the US are sexist and racist? Hopefully not, right? But what this study does tell us is that the vast majority of college professors, especially in business, education, human services, at least from the data in this study, do have biases against people of certain genders and races. And so this is why sociology and social research in general, the science of sociology, becomes really helpful for us because it helps us understand how widespread these social problems are. And like I said, these biases can become discriminatory behaviors using that model that we've been working with so far, right? If a bias idea or belief that we have is something that we cling on so strongly, even if it's in our subconscious, even if we don't overtly think we're sexist or racist, if that idea helps us kind of filter out which emails we're going to reply to and which ones we're not going to reply to, think of all of the women and all of the people of color out there that are not going to get admitted into these college programs simply because they can't get a foot in the door. They can't get an email replied to or responded to, or at least they're not getting the replies at the same rates that people who are perceived to be white men are getting responses to. So that's really the significance of this study and of what social research can tell us, just how widespreading these problems are. And again, it doesn't mean that the vast majority of college professors, myself included, are sexist or racist, but it does mean that we likely have biases that are against women, that are against people of color, because we are products of the environments that we live in. And we're going to spend the rest of this semester unpacking the information and the messaging that we receive as from different agents of socialization that cause us to have these biases that in turn can result in these discriminatory practices. So here's another good example from one of my favorite TV shows, Friends. I definitely view it with a grain of salt because the older I've become, the more wiser I've become. There are some problematic messages in this TV show, one of them being the clip we're going to watch, which comes from the episode The One with the Male Nanny. So as we watch this brief video clip here, I'd like you to reflect on these couple questions on the side and go ahead and write down your responses to these in your notes if you're doing that. What biases and stereotypes are presented in this clip? And then also, how could these biases result in prejudiced beliefs and or discriminatory behaviors, and against which groups of people? So keep those questions in mind while we watch this clip here.
I really do understand how hard it's got to be to leave your child with another person. I mean, it's like leaving behind a piece of your heart.
Sandy, that's exactly what it is.
Are you gay?
It's okay. I get that a lot doing what I do. Mm-hmm. But I am straight. I'm engaged, actually. Oh. Her name's Delia.
Oh, that's pretty.
So you're just like a guy who's a nanny.
I realize how it's a bit unorthodox for some people, but I really believe the most satisfying thing you can do with your life is take care of a child.
Okay.
Like at my last job, I met Daniel when he was 3 weeks old, and I got to watch him grow into this awesome person. When I left, I said, "I'll see you soon." He said to me, "It's good, Andy." That was his name for me.
Oh.
I'll see you every day, right in...
Yeah, kids say all kinds of crap.
Oh, God, she must need her diaper changed.
No, I can take care of it if you want.
Oh, that would be great. Okay. I love him.
Oh, come on. He's a guy.
So, he's smart, he's qualified. Give me one good reason we shouldn't try him out.
Because it's weird.
Why?
What kind of job is that for a man? A nanny? I mean, it's like if a woman wanted to be...
Yes.
King?
I hope you don't mind. I use some of my homemade lotion on Emma. It's a mixture of calendula and honey cream. It'll dry that rash right up. Plus, it keeps the hands young.
Yes, Sandy, you're hired.
That's great. I'm sorry. It's just such an emotional thing when you're welcomed into a new family.
Oh, God, come here.
You gotta be at least bi.
So, a lot to unpack in there, right? What biases and stereotypes are presented in this clip. Well, obviously, the character Ross here, who's the father of the child in need of a nanny, had some pretty severe reservations about hiring Freddie Prinze Jr.'s character here as the male nanny, because in Ross's mind, he couldn't just fathom this idea about why a man would pursue a profession that he associated only with women, right? So just because he had this bias in his head that men can't do that type of work, it would have led him, we would expect, if Rachel, this character here, wasn't there, if Rachel wasn't there, it seems very unlikely that Ross ever would have hired this individual to be the nanny for their child, because he didn't think that men are capable of that. So what stereotypes are presented in this? Well, the other stereotype that comes out, obviously, is that Ross made this association that all men who would want to do a job that's typically associated, or historically in our society at least, was associated predominantly with women, being a nanny or a babysitter, would make that man's sexuality come into question. Right? And I mean, how bizarre does that seem? But again, think about this context in your own life. If a man in our society deviates against the gender norms, right, does anything that is expected to be not masculine, or does anything that we associate with femininity in our society, we call his sexuality into question, right? So we're already engaging in biases here. We're definitely calling on a lot of stereotypical knowledge, which is resulting, at least in this scenario, for Ross to have a very prejudiced belief or emotion towards men who, in his view, are engaging in work that is only supposed to be for women. And indeed, this seems to would have resulted in a discriminatory behavior. Again, if Jennifer Aniston's character Rachel wasn't there, it seems very unlikely that Ross would have hired this individual who seems very qualified. I don't know if they talked about it in this clip, but I know from my knowledge of watching the show that he has a degree in child development, a really impressive resume, very highly qualified for this job to watch their child. But he likely would not have gotten that job if Rachel didn't so strongly advocate for him, right? So that's how we start to see how this bias can result in stereotypical thinking, which harbors people to have prejudiced beliefs, which can result in discriminatory behavior. And of course, it's those acts of discrimination, right? Not giving a person a job, not considering someone to get accepted for a position that they're qualified for just because we have this negative feeling towards them, that results in these structures of inequality that we're going to be unpacking throughout the semester. So I think a really good example, and you can always be out on the alert when you're watching TV shows, especially stuff from the 90s. It's kind of notoriously awful because it all happened before we started really thinking more deeply about how problematic some of these stereotypes can really be in society. But it's always fun to keep your feelers out when you're watching and consuming media, to make these connections to sociology. So that's something I hope a lot of you will do throughout your discussion posts during the semester. Oops. Just a couple more slides
with unlimited
here to
DVR
go through.
included, easily create and manage your library. YouTube TV.
Don't know what I'm playing there. Back to business. All right. So just a few things to wrap up here. The last thing I want to touch on was just some positive strategies that we can apply. There was a lot of strategies offered throughout the content this week for how we can actually go about addressing our bias. One of the things that Dr. Eberhardt mentioned in her TED Talk, which I thought was just a great simple tip, is slow down, right? A lot of times our biased thoughts and reactions are caused because we're relying on our automatic responses to things, which was probably evident to you when you completed the implicit association test, right? The implicit association test doesn't ask you to stop and think about anything. It's asking you to make on-the-spot judgments, which a lot of times is what we result to in our lives. But if we take the time to really stop and think about the ideas that we have, what evidence do I have to support the way I'm thinking about this particular person or group of people, a lot of times we could stop and catch ourselves and correct our biases. And indeed, we need to engage in more of this reflexive work, this slowed down thinking, engaging in this friction, as Dr. Eberhardt called it, to help us really understand where our biases are coming from and how we can address them. And of course, when we start thinking like sociologists, sociologist, again, we start looking at these bigger social structures in our society, things like our religion or our upbringing that really instilled some of these biases in us. And that's when we start engaging in this sociological imagination. So first, we can reflect and identify our biases, we can question their origin, and then be mindful and actually work to try and reduce our own